All right, so you want to dive into this Young Thug case, huh?
Yeah, it's a wild one.
This is the rapper, right? Grammy winner. But also, there are some serious allegations.
Exactly. And it all kind of boils down to this question: can you really use someone's music, their art, as evidence against them in a court of law?
Okay, so let's back up for a sec. For anyone who's not totally up to speed, Young Thug, real name Jeffrey Williams, he took a plea deal recently.
Right. Pleaded guilty to a bunch of charges.
Like what? Give us the rundown.
Gang activity, drug offenses, even a racketeering conspiracy charge, which is no joke.
Wow. Okay, so when you hear plea deal, you kind of assume, well, they're admitting guilt.
Right, and in most cases, yeah, but there's also this thing called a no contest plea.
Which is what he did for that racketeering charge.
Exactly. And it can be a strategic move. It's like saying, look, I'm not admitting guilt, but I'm also not going to fight this.
So you avoid a trial, but legally, it's similar to a guilty plea when it comes to sentencing.
Yep, that's the gist.
Okay, so bottom line, what's the sentence?
40 years.
Whoa, okay, hold on. 40 years.
Well, it's complicated. See, the first 5 years were commuted to time served. So he's already done that time.
Gotcha, so not a full 40 behind bars.
Nope. After he gets out, he's on probation for 15 years. If he completes that successfully, another 20 years of the sentence is considered time served.
Okay, so a lot riding on his behavior for the next decade and a half.
Big time. And the probation conditions, those are pretty intense too.
Like what? What's he got to do?
The usual stuff: no hanging out with gang members, no firearms, random drug tests.
Right, standard probation stuff.
But then there are some really specific things, like for the first 10 years of his probation, he can't just travel freely within the Atlanta area.
What, so no popping down to the store for milk?
Not unless it's like a family thing, you know?
Yeah.
Weddings, funerals, stuff like that.
Wow, so even going to a Braves game is out.
Not without special permission from his probation officer. But here's the kicker. The judge also ordered him to give these presentations 4 times a year back in Atlanta.
Presentations about what?
Anti-gang stuff, anti-gun violence messaging. He's got to talk to kids, community groups, that kind of thing.
So basically, the judge is trying to use his platform, his influence, to actually combat the problems he was convicted of contributing to.
Exactly. She even said something during sentencing about how kids might copy what they hear in music.
Which brings us to that whole debate about using rap lyrics as evidence. The prosecution leaned hard on that in their case.
It's tricky territory, right? You've got prosecutors saying lyrics can show a person's mindset, their potential affiliations.
But on the flip side, the defense argues it stifles artistic expression, could lead to bias against certain genres of music.
Exactly. It's like judging a novelist based solely on what their characters do in a book.
So where do you draw the line? Like, can you really take song lyrics as a literal confession or a plan of action?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's one that courts are still trying to figure out.
So if Young Thug's attorney was so confident they could have won at trial, why take the plea deal at all?
Well, according to his lawyer, he was worried about the toll this was all taking on his kids, his career.
Man, that's rough. To potentially risk everything for a trial, even if you believe you're innocent.
It's a tough call. And it kind of highlights that whole thing about public pressure, you know, the scrutiny that celebrities face, especially in a high-profile case like this.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's break this down even further. We have this super successful rapper, but the accusations paint a very different picture.
Right. Prosecutors claim he co-founded a violent street gang and that his record label, Young Stoner Life YSL, was actually a front for it.
Young Slime Life, they say, is the gang's real name.
And that's where this whole thing gets even more complicated, because now we're not just talking about an individual's actions, but the alleged criminal activities of an entire organization.
Right, so how much overlap is there between the music industry and gang culture? Are they really intertwined like the prosecution claims?
It's a big question, and one that this case unfortunately doesn't fully answer. This whole thing has been dragging on for a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, didn't the initial charges come down a couple years ago?
2022, I think. It was a massive indictment, like 24 people accused of violating Georgia's ARCARA Act.
ARCARA, that's the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, right?
Yep. It basically lets prosecutors go after groups of people for crimes they say are part of a bigger criminal enterprise.
So it's not just about individual charges, it's about showing a pattern of criminal activity.
Exactly. And just picking a jury for this thing took almost 10 months. Then there were all these delays, complications.
Sounds like a logistical nightmare.
Oh, it was. And Young Thug wasn't the only one who ended up taking a plea deal. Some of his co-defendants did too.
Huh, interesting. So, what's the big takeaway from all of this?
I think it forces us to really think about the assumptions we make about people based on their art, their job, their public image.
Right, because things aren't always what they seem.
In this case, it really underscores how complex the criminal justice system is, especially when you're dealing with something like gang affiliation, which can be really hard to prove definitively.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines, the drama of it all, but there's always more to the story, right?
Always. Cases like this, they often don't have easy answers, and in a way, that makes them even more fascinating to examine.
I like that. No easy answers. More to uncover. More to think about.
And another thing that's really interesting to think about is just the size of this case. It wasn't just about Young Thug, right? It was this whole alleged criminal enterprise thing operating under the cover of a legit music label.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it makes you wonder about these huge RICO prosecutions. Are they actually effective in stopping gang activity? Or do they just end up catching mostly lower-level people while the real kingpins stay out of reach?
That's a big debate. Some legal experts say REO cases are crucial for disrupting organized crime, but others argue they cast this way too wide net and end up targeting people with pretty weak connections to the supposed criminal enterprise.
It's wild to think about the potential impact on the music industry as a whole, too. Could this case make people scrutinize rappers and their lyrics even more? Will record labels be hesitant to sign artists who might be associated with gangs, even if there's no solid proof?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. You often see this kind of overcorrection after something like this happens, and the music industry has had its fair share of moral panics, right?
Totally. Think about the controversies around rock and roll, heavy metal, even hip-hop in its early days. Certain genres become scapegoats when society is feeling anxious.
Exactly. And with this case, you can't ignore the racial dynamics either. Young Thug is black, rap is predominantly associated with black culture. There are definitely concerns that this could reinforce negative stereotypes, fuel discrimination against black artists.
Absolutely. That racial context is a huge part of this conversation. We can't just sweep it under the rug. If we don't talk about it openly, we risk perpetuating the same biases that have been a problem in the criminal justice system for way too long.
For sure. So where do we go from here? This is a complicated legal case, no easy answers. There's this big debate about art's role in society and these serious questions about race and justice hanging over everything.
It's a lot to unpack.
And remember, things are still developing. Young Thug took a plea deal, but some of his co-defendants are still waiting to see what happens to them. And those legal battles about using rap lyrics as evidence, those aren't going away anytime soon. This whole story is going to keep people talking, debating, analyzing it for years to come.
To me, it feels like this case almost reflects some of the anxieties and tensions that are happening in our society right now. It touches on music, crime, race, freedom of expression, even the very definition of justice.
You hit the nail on the head. It intersects with so many fundamental issues. And it reminds us that even though the world's constantly changing, there are some questions that just keep coming back to challenge us. It forces us to look at our own biases, wrestle with how complex the world really is.
Yeah, it really underscores how much work we still have to do to build a more just and equitable society.
Absolutely. And cases like this, as messy as they are, they can be a starting point for those tough but important conversations, the ones that can actually help us move towards a better future.
I love that. Now, one thing that I found particularly interesting was the judge's decision to basically use Young Thug's influence as part of his punishment. Making him give these anti-gang presentations, that's a pretty bold move. And I'm really curious to see what happens.
Yeah, it's a unique approach for sure. It makes you wonder, can someone who's been convicted of these serious crimes actually be a genuine advocate for change?
Exactly. Can someone like Young Thug really be a believable voice for reform? Or will it just come across as a PR stunt, a way to try and make himself look better?
It's a gamble, no doubt. And it touches on this bigger issue of how much power celebrities have when it comes to social change. We see it all the time, right? Famous people speaking out about politics, social issues. And there's always this question of, are they being sincere? What are their motives? Are they actually making a difference?
It's something we all have to wrestle with. Can someone with a criminal past actually be a force for good? Can art be a path to redemption?
There are no easy answers. But I think it's so important to remember that people are complex. We're all capable of good and bad. And sometimes the most powerful stories of change come from the people who have made the biggest mistakes.
That's a great perspective.
Yes.
It reminds us not to jump to conclusions, to be open to the fact that human nature is messy and complicated.
Exactly. People can change.
Yeah.
And recognizing that potential for growth, I think that's crucial.
Well said. So as we're getting to the end of our deep dive into the Young Thug case, it's obvious that this story goes way beyond the courtroom and the headlines. It's a reflection of our anxieties as a culture, our biases as a society, and this ongoing struggle to create a more just world. This Young Thug case, man, it's been a real deep dive, hasn't it? We've talked about the charges, the plea deal, that whole sentencing thing, the whole debate about using lyrics as evidence. I'm curious, what really stuck with you? What stood out the most?
I keep coming back to that unusual part of the sentence. The judge using Young Thug's platform as part of his punishment. It's like this weird social experiment almost. Is it going to work? Will he actually use his influence to do some good? We'll have to wait and see, but it definitely raises a ton of questions.
I know, right? There's no playbook for this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Can someone who's been convicted of serious crimes actually turn around and be a credible voice for change? We see celebrities championing causes all the time, but this feels different somehow.
It does, and it makes you think about the whole idea of redemption. Can art really be a tool for someone to transform themselves? Can someone's past, even a past with some pretty serious mistakes, be a source of wisdom or insight instead of just something that holds them back?
And we can't forget that this case is about more than just one artist. It sparked this whole conversation about how we view rap music, especially in the eyes of the law. Are lyrics a window into someone's real life, or are they just artistic expression? Should they be taken literally?
Yeah, that's a debate that's been going on forever, but this case definitely brought it back into the spotlight. And it highlights that bigger issue of potential bias in the justice system. Are certain genres of music, like rap, being unfairly targeted because of the content, the style, the artists who make it?
These are tough questions, and there aren't any easy answers. And honestly, they go way beyond just the world of music. They make you think about how we as a society deal with complicated issues, how we form our opinions, and what justice really means.
It's a good reminder that there's always more to learn, more perspectives to consider. Those simple, straightforward answers, a lot of times they just don't do justice to the complexity of the real world.
So true. Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into the Young Thug case, I hope you've come away with a better understanding of not just the legal stuff, but all those bigger cultural and societal questions that this case brings up.
Yeah, definitely. It's a story that's still unfolding, and what happens next could have a big impact for years to come.
And for everyone listening, I want to leave you with this. How has this whole case changed your perspective on the connection between music, fame, and the law? Keep those questions coming, keep digging deeper, keep exploring. And as always, thanks for joining us for the deep dive.